Coming to a school near you very soon is Eddie George. So, why is Eddie George being brought up on today's show? This is the first time in the history of this program or of this channel that Bowling Green State, go Falcons, has been brought up here. And Eddie George is now the head coach in the Mid-American Conference for the Falcons. So, Bowling Green has gone to a former player, Heisman Trophy winner, who was just at an HBCU, bringing it to heights that it has not been brought to before. Does that sound at all familiar? Look, Eddie George might go to Bowling Green and establish a 20-year coaching career and establish himself as the most iconic coach in the history of the program. Heck, he might be the most iconic coach in the history of the program. Can you even name another Bowling Green head coach? I can. I can name a couple of former Bowling Green head coaches. Dave Clawson just retired from Wake Forest. Now Jake Dickert goes there from Washington State. Dino Babers, not at Syracuse anymore, but was for quite a while and didn't do poorly. And of course, Fran Brown is crushing it there. Speaking of coaching carousel, Fran Brown's name will continue to get thrown out in the coming, years if he keeps winning at this rate with the Orange. But the most famous Bowling Green head coach of all time, that would be one Urban Meyer. So the reason I bring this up on today's show is because this was a national headline that Eddie George is going to be the head coach in the state of Ohio at Bowling Green. And I thought about the career trajectory that he is currently on. So he was just at Tennessee State. They had not won a conference championship until this past season since 1999. Took them to the playoffs. They lost to one of the Montana schools, which if you don't follow FCS football, Montana State, they go to the semifinals and it's not that big of a deal necessarily. They're trying to win that championship that they haven't been able to break through with. But alas, those are really good programs, so no shame there. But Eddie George making this jump up has followed a recent trend that is really starting to catch on in college football that I'm not going to say began with Deion Sanders, but I think that a lot of schools and athletic directors across the country have looked at the success that Deion Sanders has had, the cachet that he brings to Colorado, where he injected life into a lifeless program, and they've thought to themselves, maybe former players are the best way to connect with people. Now, maybe that's the best way to recruit. We're not a premier brand. How do we make ourselves unique? How do we make ourselves stand out? How about we hire a head coach who is a name everybody knows? I never watched Eddie George play a single snap of football in his career. I wasn't even born yet. But I know who he is. And suddenly Bowling Green's interesting. And all throughout this upcoming season, I'm not saying the MAC is going to dominate content here on the channel. I'll just keep my eye on it, not just this season, but in the coming years, because you better believe that with Deion Sanders' success at Colorado, schools are going to look at Eddie George, and if he goes not just to Tennessee State and makes them something that, is not an easy thing to accomplish given their track record in the last couple of decades, and then he goes to Bowling Green, which is a non-traditional power. If he were to generate a conference championship, you'll see his name buzz around in coaching circles really fast, really fast, because these two guys aren't even the only former players of the high profile variety who are in the coaching ranks right now. You have Trent Dilfer down at UAB. Hasn't gone well so far, but it gets you out there. It makes you identifiable to the broader college football community. And yes, brand power in the sport means a great deal. And Trent Dilfer was at the Lipscomb Academy and did really well. Hasn't gone well yet with the Blazers. We'll see what happens this season. But he's down there. Michael Vick, by the way, talked about him when he got hired to Norfolk State. Do you know who is a head coach in Division I FCS college football this year? Deshaun Jackson. That's right. Head coach at Delaware State, Deshaun Jackson. So when it happens one time, that old expression, once could be a coincidence, twice is a trend. I'm seeing this pop up all over the sport. And Deion Sanders is maybe the most high-profile example where it feels like, he gets hired despite maybe a relative lack of coaching experience. I'm not saying to Colorado, I'm saying Jackson State, where it's, hey, are you the most experienced head coach out there? No, you're not. Is Michael Vick the most experienced head coach out there? No, he's not. Trent Dilfer at least had several years, but not at the college level, at the high school level. And these guys all get hired. Why? Because they're big name former players. And in the age of NIL portal and the recruiting, I think programs look at an opportunity to hire someone like Eddie George and say, that could be a quick turnaround. Because players want to go play for that guy. Maybe because their dad played with him growing up or watched him on TV or spoke glowingly about, oh man, Eddie George was incredible. Oh man, Deion Sanders was great. It gives you a brand. It gives you something for kids to think about as a reason to go play football at insert this school that they wouldn't otherwise have. So if I wanted to be super clickbaity, I would come on here and say that if Ryan Day's fired in 4 years, Eddie George will be the next head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes. I didn't come on here and say that for all of you that accuse me of clickbait out there. But I do think it's noteworthy he's in the state of Ohio. That doesn't seem like a complete and total coincidence. But this is also a guy at Tennessee State who had to be convinced to be the head coach. He wasn't really sure about doing it, and the athletic director said, no, I think you can. Well, that AD was correct, because now here is Eddie George at the FBS ranks. Can he turn Bowling Green into a playoff team? Okay, no, don't be silly. We're not going down that particular rabbit hole here. But I don't think that this trend is slowing down. I really don't. Because what former players also have is a more recent perspective than a lot of older, more chiseled coaches on what it's like to be a player and what it means to have the freedom that those players now have and the power that they have. The buying power of the average college football player today is infinitely higher than what it was back in the early 2000s. Players couldn't make demands back then, at least not, outside of the high profile ones, of course, who could probably make a demand request or two. But the average kid, or even really good players, they were trying to find the right opportunity. They couldn't go to places and say, I need you to give me more money, or I don't think this is a good enough package, or I don't feel like you're doing this, the right way. You didn't have that back then. You didn't have that sort of mobility. You didn't have those sorts of options. So I think this is going to continue to be something that appeals to athletic directors. And again, there's only the one notable example. Kirby Smart is a former player, but who remembers watching Kirby Smart play football? Anybody? Yeah, I'm sure Georgia fans do. But overall, you know him because he was a defense coordinator at Alabama, not because he was a safety for Georgia way back in the day. But you know Eddie George because he was a Heisman Trophy winning guy at Ohio State. That's what you know him for. You know Deshaun Jackson because he has a highlight reel that is still legendary to this day in the year 2025. That's why you know who that is. And now you associate that with Delaware State. Bet you never thought about Delaware State before. Now you have, because you listen to or watch this show, which I thank you for doing. But this Eddie George thing, you just keep an eye. You keep an eye on what happens with the Falcons at Bowling Green this year and in the coming years to see if he doesn't raise his profile to try to go for a bigger job. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.